Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt from MWA Woodworks and it is 2021. Yay, congratulations, we made it out of 2020 and I am so looking forward to the next year and what it has in store for the channel. But something did happen in 2020 that was a pretty big milestone. So before we move on, I wanted to mention that I did hit 50,000 subscribers to the channel. That's a huge milestone for me. Never did I think that that would happen. And I am so grateful for everyone for their support and following along as I do what I do here in the shop. So just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for that. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and do that. I would be very grateful if you did. It is a great time to do that as my channel is just starting to really grow and pick up, and I would love to have you on board. Now, as I crossed over that milestone, it did occur to me that I haven't yet done a shop tour video. So with 50,000 new subscribers, I figured it was about time to give you guys the tour of the shop, show you around the different areas, how my workflow works, and some of the tools that I use. So let's get started. Now, if you're a professional woodworker, you probably have your own outbuilding or separate shop where you do your work, but most hobby woodworkers tend to fall into one of two categories. You're either a garage woodworker or you're a basement woodworker. Now, in my situation, I happen to have just about the best of both worlds because my house is located on the side of a hill, so I have a drive-under garage, and it's a 3-bay garage, and one of those bays is completely dedicated to my shop. You can kind of see behind me here as it goes about 75% of the way underneath my house. My shop is divided into two rooms. The front half of the shop, which I'm in now, is about 25 feet deep and about 15 feet wide. And the back half of the shop is a little bit deeper at 28 feet, but it is 4 feet narrower at only 11 feet wide. And that does play a big factor in how I decided to lay out my shop workflow. Now, the front part of my shop is really dedicated to breaking down the materials that I bring in my shop. So they would come through this garage door into here. I've got my chop saw here for chopping down long pieces of timber. I've got an MFT table here, and just off camera is my table saw for breaking down plywood. Now, one of the other things that you may have seen me use on this channel is a centipede work holder. That's something that I keep stored away most of the time, but when I do have sheet goods in the shop, I can bring that out, set it up right here in this space, and break down all of my sheet goods into manageable parts before heading over to the table saw. Now, over here in the back corner of the shop is where I keep my mobile dust collection cart. Now, this is something that I built a couple of years ago, mainly as a way to get secondary dust collection in my shop. So I like to hook this up to my smaller tools like my miter saw and my sanders, but I also really like wheeling this thing around the shop at the end of a big project and sweeping up the floors, cleaning up my tools, and getting everything reset for the next project. It's only about a 2 foot by 2 foot footprint, so you can store it away just about anywhere. It doesn't take up a lot of room. And it only takes about half a sheet of 3/4 inch plywood to build, so it's not resource intensive in that way either. So if this is something that you're interested in building for your shop, I do have plans available to build your own. I've got a full build video on YouTube, as well as a step-by-step tutorial for how I built this thing over at mwawoodworks.com. And I'll go ahead and leave links in the description if that's something that you'd like to check out for your shop. And this is my mobile flip-top cart. So this is another build plan from Brad at Fix This Build That. It is mobile. I do keep 2 different sanders on here. It is super handy to have, and again, doesn't have a very big footprint, can get out of my way when I'm not sanding, and is another thing that I brought with me to this shop from my previous garage shop. And so the other thing to show you in this part of the shop is my jig wall. This is just a piece of pegboard that I put on the wall with some 2x4 backing it. And I keep all of my table saw accessories like my crosscut sleds, my tapering jigs, and some of the things for my auxiliary fence nice and handy, visible, and mainly just up and out of the way so they don't get broken and they're not in the way, they're not a tripping hazard or anything like that, and they're just easy to visually find when I need to go and grab them. All right, so rounding the corner we have wood storage. Now this is one area where I keep wood. Like most woodworkers, I do have a problem with squirreling away anything that I can find for later use. But a lot of my larger stock gets put on this rack up and out of the way. And behind me over here, I've got some vertical bins where I have sorted through some of my smaller offcuts that are at least 18 to 20 inches long. And that is a great area to go shopping for materials during the holidays when it comes to building scrapwood projects, cutting boards, things of that nature for gifts. I've got it mostly sorted by wood species, so finding what I need and at the right length is really easy in those vertical bins. One other thing that roams around the shop is my other vacuum. This is a Festool vac. It's got its own Cyclone separator on it for keeping the actual vacuum clean and free of dust. Now, this one typically just gets used for my Festool tools. I really like Festool's ecosystem. I can hook this thing up to the sanders, to the domino, to the track saw, any of my Festool tools that I'm using around the shop. That's pretty much the dedicated vacuum for those tools. Now, in the center of the shop is my table saw. This is certainly the workhorse of the shop. It's where the majority of the activity happens, and so it goes right in the middle. I have a large 3 horsepower SawStop professional cabinet saw, as well as an outfeed / very poorly built assembly table to catch the workpieces as they come off the saw. It is one of the most helpful things that I have in my shop in terms of horizontal, just work surface area to be able to do assemblies on. Now, one of the first things I did when I bought this saw was to build a router table into the side wing of the table saw. So 5-6 years ago, when I was back in my old 2-car garage wood shop, I didn't have a lot of space, so in order to maximize it, I decided to go ahead and build a router table into the table saw in order to save that space. It does have room for saw blade storage, accessories for the router table and the table saw. I've got a miter gauge hanging over here, and I've got an Incra router lift in this to raise and lower the router inside the table. All right, now over on this side of the shop, we've got clamps. So I've got vertical clamp storage over here for all of my smaller clamps, as well as storage for my larger pipe clamps and parallel clamps. Now, this is about a 5 or 6 foot walk between the clamps and the assembly table and my table saw over here on the right side of me. So while it's not 100% ideal, the location right now, it works well for me, and it gives me a great place to keep my clamps up and out of the way in the part of the shop that I really wasn't using for anything else. And right here is the addition that I made to my shop for 2020, and that is an MFT table from Festool. Really love this thing, even more than I thought I would when I bought it. It brings so much versatility to using the track saw, and it gives me another horizontal work surface to use when I need that, because that is really something with all the space I have in my shop that I'm kind of lacking, is nice big areas to do projects on, nice horizontal surfaces. That's definitely going to be addressed in 2021. Now, right next to the clamps is the area that I designate for all of my fasteners. So in this upper cabinet, I keep a lot of the most commonly used dominoes, pocket screws, traditional screws. I keep my glue bottles up here, and I've got more storage for screws up top for bulk screws that I have, as well as some sanding blots and lots of other random stuff that just ends up inside of a cabinet with no door on it. And in this toolbox, I keep all of my wrenches and drivers, as well as random different types of blades and other joinery systems. I also keep even more fasteners. This is pretty much screws, bolts, nuts, and things of that nature, as well as specialty fasteners. And then this is just other random storage for things that I use less commonly. Parts for jigs, hinges, things of that nature get stored down here. And then all of my hammers, pliers, screwdrivers, measuring tools, cutters, things of that nature get stored up top. And right next to the fasteners, as you might imagine, is where I keep my drills and drivers. So they stay on this shelf. I've got the battery chargers up here. And in this drawer is where I keep the majority of my drill bits. And this other cabinet is where I keep a lot of the audio and video equipment that I use when I'm creating content in the shop. So things like extra lenses, batteries, mics, things of that nature. I like to keep them in this cabinet so that the dust and debris that gets kicked up when I'm working in the shop doesn't get to my electronics. They stay nice and clean behind this door, no problems. Now, the other thing that typically lives in this part of my shop is my armor tool bench. So this is one of the other mobile workbenches that I have in my shop. It's a good area to do assemblies or work on projects. And I built this drawer system down here. This is primarily a catch-all drawer for things like clamps, extra sandpaper, random things that I don't have another good place for in the shop today. But I also keep my sanders down here, as well as my sandpaper storage. So that's all laid out nice and neat here where I can read the grits and pull out what I need when I need it. Now, one of the things that I didn't want to forget to talk about was this logo sign that was made for me by Lizzie over at the House of Timber. She is an amazing scroll saw artist. She made this for me, and I proudly display this in my shop. It is one of the nicest things to look at. I like to use it as a backdrop when I'm recording videos. It is just amazing. She's an amazing artist, and I love having this thing in my shop. And as we round the corner to the final wall on this part of the shop, I've got all of my marking and measuring tools over here, primarily from Woodpecker, but I do have room to add additional marking and measuring tools as that part of my tool collection grows. And I do have another logo sign, this one made out of acrylic by Trevor over at Maker Experiment. He sent that to me, did a wonderful job, looks awesome right up here on the tool wall. And down here, I've got yet another router table. This one is from Woodpeckers. I don't really need 2 router tables, but the other one that's built into my table saw, again, I built that one from scratch back when I didn't have a lot of room in my other shop. Now that I have a bigger shop, I really wanted to transition into having a dedicated space for the router and for router storage, which I haven't yet built into this base yet, but that's coming in 2021 as well. And the old router table in the table saw is probably going to go away so that I can utilize that space for more assembly area. Now, right next to the tool wall is probably my favorite shop project that I've ever done, and that is my hand tool cabinet. So I don't have a lot of hand tools, but what I do have fits nice and neatly into this cabinet. I've got a bunch of vintage hand planes that I bought at an auction several years ago. I keep all my chisels in here, bevel gauges, block planes, mallets, things of that nature. Now, I do not yet have a traditional tool bench in this wood shop. I envision that when I do, it's going to go right next to this hand plane cabinet, but for now, everything fits nice and tidy into this one little area, and there's still plenty of room to grow if I have to make different additions down the road. And it's just pretty to look at. I love having this thing in my shop. All right, the other thing in this part of the shop that I have is my supply cabinet. And of course, as the name suggests, that's what it contains. I've got all type of finishing supplies, gloves, tapes, adhesives. I've got big bottles of glue down here and a lot of my just random painting equipment and caulk. Any random supplies really that need a home in the shop that needs to be nice and organized, it's all right here in this cabinet. I did also want to point out that I have a dust port that comes through the wall here that feeds a 4-inch dust collection line to my table saw as well as my router table, and it goes all the way back to my dust Cyclone, which lives in the back part of the shop, and that's where we're going to go next. All right, so here in the back of the shop, the first thing I want to show you is my shop locker. Now, this is centrally located between the front and back half of the shop, and I basically use this to keep a first aid kit, some PPE, my shop aprons, and anything else that I just want to keep at hand, but keep it away from the dusty environment. I keep it inside this cabinet. I think these are a great thing for anybody to have in their shop as a way to keep especially their PPE located in one place. It's just a reminder to make sure to use your PPE because, hey, it's always in one place. You know where to find it. And the other thing that I keep tucked away in this back corner of the shop is my CNC machine. Now, I don't use this a lot on camera, but it is something that I use, especially around the holidays a lot, to batch out gifts for people. It's fantastic for if you're making cutting boards for putting juice grooves or making engravements or something on gifts that you're giving to some folks, or even if you're just learning to prototype or template on one. Fantastic tool. I absolutely love it. And so it's got a nice home here on this nice big cart with storage underneath it for all the bits and things of that nature that go with the machine. Now, on the opposite side of the wall from the CNC machine is where I keep this rack with all of my Festool gear on it. So my track saw, my dominoes, and my sanders all live here in one central location where I can just grab and go with a sustainer, get the job done, put it back where it goes, nice and tidy. And right next to the Festool rack is my lathe stand. So this is admittedly probably the least used area of my shop, but I did build this awesome maple heavy lathe stand for my lathe. The top of this lathe stand allows me to either add the extension bed to the jet lathe that I have, or it'll fit a full-size lathe if I ever decide to upgrade and have the need for doing more turning larger pieces. But I do have plenty of storage in here for turning tools And in there, I keep a lot of big chunks of wood blanks and things to turn on the lathe. Now the other two tools along this wall is a hydraulic press, which I primarily use for CNC inlays when I need to get a nice even amount of pressure across a large inlay, which I don't do that very often. This mainly goes unused right next to the lathe that mainly goes unused. But then there's my drill press, which I use all the time. So this is one of the tools that I bought when I very first started woodworking. This is a Shop Fox drill press. It has been an awesome tool in my shop. I built this nice table for it. It's got a Formica top on a plywood base. Really awesome, really handy, and has been great in my shop over the years. It sits on a stand. It's got storage. I mainly keep all of the random different drill bits that I don't keep in the front of the shop for my hand drills in here, things like Forstner bits and other things like that. And then there's some more storage down there that just collects random things that don't have another home in the shop. All right, so along this other wall of the back part of my shop is where I keep all of my larger power tools, starting with my bandsaw. This is a Laguna 1412 bandsaw. Fantastic bandsaw to have in your shop. It's not huge, but it gets the job done. It has a lot of resaw capacity if you're wanting to do something like that, and plenty of power for that. Or if you're doing finer work with a smaller blade on here, it's good for that as well. And then right next to that, I've got a parking spot for my drum sander, which doesn't really have a home or place to fit anywhere else in the shop. So I just kind of stick it in the empty bay there where it just sits most of the time. Unless I've got some ingrain that I need to plane down or some figured wood. That's the other reason why I have a drum sander. It's not an essential tool for a beginning woodworker, but it is something that as your collection of tools grows, it adds some versatility to your shop, and that's why I've got one. All right, so the last two big tools in my shop are my milling tools. So I've got a 15-inch grizzly planer as well as an 8-inch grizzly joiner. And again, these are tools for milling rough sawn lumber. So if you're just getting started in woodworking, you may not have invested in tools like this yet, which is fine because you can get S4S lumber and skip straight to the table saw for your work. But eventually you're going to want to get to the point where you can mill your own rough sawn lumber. It gives you a lot more versatility in terms of where you can source your materials. And rough sawn lumber is almost always cheaper, and being able to mill it right before you're going to use it ensures that you have nice, straight, flat product for your projects. Now here in the back corner of my shop is one of the biggest tools that I have, and that is my Cyclone dust collector. Now, when I moved into this shop a couple of years ago, this is one thing that I knew for sure I wanted to upgrade to because of the long, narrow nature of my shop. From this dust collector to my table saw in the other room is approximately 50 feet. So I just didn't have enough horsepower in my old dust collector to be able to adequately collect the dust at all of my milling tools as well as that table saw up there. So I really needed to upgrade to something more powerful. I went with the 3 horsepower model on this. It's connected to a 55-gallon drum down there. So I can do a lot of milling and a lot of cutting before I fill that bad boy up and have to empty it out. And I've got one straight line, main trunk line running through here that hits all of my tools along the way. And then as you saw earlier, it goes through the wall and then heads over to my table saw and my router table. Now, one question you might ask is why I ran my main dust collection line low along the wall instead of high. Now, there's really a couple of reasons why I did it that way. One of them is I wanted to be able to utilize this space above the wall for storage. Now, if I'd run my line high along the wall, I'd have to bring 4-inch pipe down at each interval to feed each one of my tools, and that was just going to eat up wall space that could be used for cabinets. It could be used like I have it here for wood storage, and I just didn't want to give that up. Now, by keeping the line low, it basically runs behind the tools. There's nothing else that I use that space for, so it's really not taking up any room that would be used for something else. And I've got just a small piece of 4-inch flex hose coming off the main line into each tool. So it's actually really, really efficient when it comes to dust collection at each one of my tools. And so that's the reason why I decided to go low instead of taking it up high and running lines down to feed each tool. All right, so one other thing I wanted to show you back here. Look, this is my wood shop, but it's also kind of my man cave, and a man cave's got to have a TV, right? So I built this little cabinet to house an old flat screen TV that I just keep on the wall back here. If I want to have a ball game on in the background while I'm working, just provides a little bit more hominess, if you will, or a little bit of entertainment when I need to take a break or just reset from the work that I'm doing. All right, guys, yeah, more wood storage. This is a offcut cart that I built quite a few years ago to keep larger offcuts that don't fit in my small vertical bin up there because, again, I don't throw anything away. But here you go. My hoarding shame is now out there for the world to see because I've got wood stashed everywhere in the shop. Now, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a preview of what's to come in the shop in 2021. Now, in 2020, I spent most of my time doing projects related to the home and I neglected my shop. In 2021, I'm going to put a much bigger emphasis on shop storage and organization and workflow to really take this space that I have from a 10 to an 11 when it comes to efficiency. So one of the things that I want to do first in here is really better utilize this space behind me. So as I mentioned before, I've got lots of wood storage. Now, a lot of that is a byproduct of the fact that I used to do production work and I needed a lot more lumber on hand at any one time to meet orders. I don't do that anymore. I do basically 1 or 2 projects at a time. I don't necessarily do big opportunity buys when it comes to lumber anymore. And so I really don't need, especially all the rack space that I have for big lumber storage. So I think one of the things I'm going to do is keep the lumber racks in the back and really pare this down and utilize this space for base cabinets, upper cabinets to give me a maximum amount of storage space for tools and organization. And I'll leave a little bit, maybe 2 or 3 feet up at the very top there if I want to keep a little bit of lumber up here at the front of the shop. But that's really going to be it. I'm going to take a lot of this out, add a bunch of cabinets in here, put a miter saw in here, make this a miter saw station, and that alone is going to give me a tremendous amount of shop storage and organization. Now, one of the things that I mentioned earlier was the need for horizontal work surfaces. This table that I have here on the backside of my table saw is the biggest piece of real estate that I have to work on in the shop. But this thing is seriously old. It was never meant to be an assembly table, even though I kind of try to use it as best I can that way now. But it's got a big dip in the middle. It's not flat at all. And it just takes up a lot of room that I really could be using better. So I think one of the things that I'm going to do is look into building an assembly table, a full-size assembly table that will occupy the space beyond the saw back there. I will probably try to integrate my MFT table into it. That way I can, I'm not doubling my used floor space. I can integrate those things since that MFT table is great for assembly and you've got the dog holes for reference to make sure everything is square. And then I might do something much more simple behind the saw, a smaller footprint area over here for an outfeed table where I really need it. I don't use the table saw anymore for breaking down large sheet goods. I do that back there on my centipede work table. So I really don't need all of this taking up this room. And that is going to allow me to potentially get to the point where I can build a traditional workbench. So if I get to the point where I can have a dedicated assembly table and a dedicated hand tool bench, I will then have really upped the amount of horizontal work surface that I have in the shop. That's my goal. I don't know if I'm going to get to all of that in 2021, but that's what I would like to do. And that's going to make this space a lot more efficiently used than it is today. I've got a lot of open floor space where I could really do a much better job of utilizing the space than I do today. All right, well, that is it. Shop Tour 2021, done. Now, if you have any questions about something that you saw in the video, or maybe there was something that I neglected to talk about that you have questions about, absolutely leave those down in the comments below. I would love to circle back around and answer those for you. Also, one more time, thank you so much for the support that you showed me in 2020 in helping me reach that big 50,000 subscriber milestone. It really does mean a ton to me that many folks care about what I've got going on in my shop and want to see it as I share it. So thank you so much for that, and it gives me so much inspiration and hope to continue doing this in 2021 and show you guys what I've got going on. So until next time, have fun in the shop.